I belong to a gym right down the street from me. It's like a half mile away from my house. It's so close that I usually walk. I cut through some yards and I'm there in like 8 minutes. When it's raining, I'll drive, or if it's exceptionally cold, but usually I walk. By the way, this information that I'm sharing with you about my distance to the gym, completely irrelevant. I'm not sure why I'm sharing. I should really script this stuff out. This is what I want to talk about. There is a line of elliptical machines in the middle of the gym. And it's not like they're shoved in a corner or behind a wall. They are smack dab in the middle. One time, there was a man on the elliptical machine that captivated me. Truth of the matter is, everyone in the gym was staring at him. He was almost doing this dance on the elliptical. He had his headphones on, he was wearing short shorts, an oversized tank top, and he was just letting the music flow through him. He was very noodly, almost cartoonish. So imagine Gru from Minions on an elliptical, completely oblivious to the world around him. He was bobbing his head. He was closing his eyes. He would occasionally bend over as if he was touching his toes, alternating right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. He would turn around so he was on the elliptical backwards. It was a ballet. And when I first saw this, I was a little embarrassed. Maybe not embarrassed, but I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was looking around for cameras because I thought maybe this was a prank of some sort, but it wasn't. This is his thing. He puts the music on, gets lost in his groove, and he just goes for it. So a few weeks pass, and I see him again at the gym on the ellipticals, and he's doing the same routine. And he's not doing it for a show. It's just what he does. Now when I see him exercising, I look at him in awe, not amusement, because I think to myself, is there anything I do in my life that brings me that much joy? And I don't care who is around me, watching me. I'm still going to do it because it makes me happy. It's like watching a child at play. No past, no future, just playing in that moment. I've never introduced myself to this man, but he is my hero. I want to be like him. I don't want to flop around on an elliptical like he does, but I want to find that one thing that brings me so much joy that I lose myself in that moment. Do you have anything like that? The closest I get to that feeling is this podcast. Specifically that feeling when I hear the opening music, right? So will you join me? Let's hold virtual hands. Let's close our eyes. Let's let that euphoric theme music take us away. And if that doesn't work, maybe we need to get on an elliptical.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Podfulness. Let's get started.
Just completed an interview with Jason Organ. Dr. Jason Organ. That's the interview you're going to hear right now. And I got to tell you, dude is smart. He knows a lot about things that I know nothing about. He is a man of science. He teaches anatomy. That's his expertise. He spent time with fossils. He is a big Mizzou fan. He's from Kansas City. We didn't even talk about the Chiefs. How could I not talk about the Kansas City Chiefs with him? That's okay. We had a lot of other topics to discuss. He's also a Deadhead. He loves the Grateful Dead. He's been a fan for a long, long time. And the podcast we talk about has a lot to do with Grateful Dead music. Now, if you're someone that isn't into the Dead's music, that's okay, because our conversation doesn't just talk about favorite songs. It talks about the lifestyle behind the Grateful Dead. We talk about the members of the band. We talk about science. We talk about social media. We go into a lot of different subjects. So it's an enjoyable interview, in my opinion. I will let you judge for yourself. This is Dr. Jason Organ. Let's get to it. Jason Organ. I never call you Dr. Organ, but I really should, because you've got how many doctoral degrees?
I have one, but I don't really care for it that much.
Really?
Nah,
By the way, I
don't you-
said doctoral. Is it
That's okay.
doctoral or doctorial?
I believe it's doctoral, but you know,
It's one mistake for me. I'm
I don't have-
intimidated by intelligence.
I don't have a doctorate in English, so you'd have to ask someone who does.
Okay. Fair enough. So what are you a doctor of?
I'm a doctor of anatomy, believe it or not.
Anatomy.
Yeah,
And you studied at Johns Hopkins.
that's correct. I did.
So you did your undergraduate where?
University of Missouri. Go Tigers.
That's
MIZ.
right. You're you're a huge Missouri guy.
I am.
You didn't have that same joie de vivre for Johns Hopkins. How come? You didn't get excited about that, but you got excited about Mizzou.
A couple of reasons. One, there's only one Division I sport at Hopkins. That's lacrosse, men's and women's, which is cool because homecoming every year was a lacrosse game. So that was kind of neat.
Okay.
But of course, homecoming was invented at the University of Missouri. I don't know if you knew that.
No, it was not.
It
really?
was. It was. It was. It was 1913, I believe. Maybe 1911. I can't remember exactly. It's something we could look up, right? If only we had a computer in front of us.
Yeah.
But
one of those.
I know, right? I'm not sure. But it was a game between the Missouri Tigers and the Kansas Jayhawks. It used to be played every year in Kansas. And then one year they said, or I'm sorry, in Kansas City. And then one year they were like, let's take these back to college campuses. So in whatever year it was that homecoming started, it was, hey, come home, all you Tiger fans, come home to Columbia, watch the Tigers take on the Jayhawks. And that's where homecoming tradition started.
Well,
so if you've ever been to homecoming and you haven't been to homecoming at Mizzou, you've actually never been to homecoming.
Because it's the original. Yep.
It is, and it's amazing.
And you grew up in Kansas City, but I assume there are more Kansas fans than Mizzou fans, right?
I don't know if there are more, but certainly where I grew up in Kansas City, which is on the Kansas side, there were more Kansas fans.
Yeah. Was that ever in consideration, becoming a Jayhawk?
You know, I did apply to Kansas twice. I applied once as an undergrad and once as a graduate student. I got rejected for grad school, but that's okay. I went to Hopkins. I'm cool with that.
Uh-huh.
And for undergraduate, I applied on a Monday, and the following Saturday, I got my acceptance letter. And I was like, yeah, this doesn't seem legit. I'm not going here.
Oh, because it was so fast. They're like, oh,
right.
yes, we'll
like,
take you.
Did you even look at my
Right.
application? Right.
Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast. We could talk about college and all of that, the nonsense there. So you are from Kansas City. How did you end up in Indianapolis?
I just like to live along I-70. I've lived in 7 cities in my life, all of them along I-70. And so it was a natural fit. I got recruited here, though, out of my first faculty position. So I'm faculty at Indiana University.
So you are teaching college level anatomy.
I am. I'm actually teaching medical school level anatomy. So I make doctors.
You make doctors. So do you feel that the future doctors that you're talking to, they have a pretty good sense of anatomy, or are you finding, wow, they really are kind of clueless? I got to mold these people.
A little from column A, a little from column B.
Okay. Do you have a favorite body part?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, I do.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about it.
All right. My favorite body part is the lower limb, actually, believe it or not. Because there's so much you can learn about how we move through our environment based on the anatomy of the lower limb. And I got into anatomy because I was interested in fossil humans. So I actually came to this career as an anthropologist first.
Okay.
And I was interested in fossils, right? Like what makes us human. You've probably heard of Lucy, the fossil. It's a 3.2 million year old specimen, a species called Australopithecus afarensis. When I was an undergraduate in college, I was fortunate to take an introduction to biological anthropology course with one of the world's foremost experts on early human evolution, who is still a dear friend of mine today. Her name is Dr. Carol Ward.
Okay.
And she's the reason I'm an anatomist. I started volunteering in her lab, and I became fascinated with it. But then I realized that it wasn't really my shtick to be out in the hot, Rift Valley of East Africa digging up fossils. I'd rather look at them in the lab later.
Yeah.
And so I focused on sort of the bench side of how do you analyze fossils. And I don't do that stuff anymore, as it turns out, because there's not a lot of grant money for it, and there are a lot of people going for it. So I've differentiated into more sort of how do we make the public understand what we do better?
Right.
How do we make the public understand themselves better?
In elementary school, the one thing I remember about fossils is the word Zinjanthropus.
Yes, Zinjanthropus.
Zinjanthropist?
Yes, Zinjanthropus is it's not actually called that name anymore. It's actually Paranthropus robustus or Boise. I can't remember which one it is, but it's a different genus name altogether. But Zinjanthropus was one of the most iconic fossils, right? Because it had this giant face with these giant teeth. And so they called it Zinjanthropus, the nutcracker, right? And the idea was that these giant molars were important for crushing, hard objects. And so they had to grow these massive faces to be able to buttress all the forces from the muscles. that would be required to break those things. And just like an iconic fossil, so beautiful. I never studied it.
No, but you seem to know a lot about it. Maybe that's because this is your wheelhouse.
Maybe, I
Dr.
haven't
Organ.
really thought about that stuff in probably 20 years, but you say Zinjanthropus and I come alive because like you, I got so excited about things like that. Lucy was the one that did it for me. She's a little bit older than Zinjanthropus, but and not from South Africa, but from East Africa. So it's just a different area, but totally fascinating to me.
So you are a man of science. What's the best thing about being a man of science, and what's the worst thing?
The best thing about being a person of science, I would say, is
it's all good.
It's all good.
I only said man because I know you're a man.
Yeah, no, it's fair. I do identify that way. But I think that this is true for everyone. Being a person of science allows one to understand the natural world with the best tool set that we have to do that. The worst part about being a person of science is that no one believes you. No one accepts your authority anymore.
And there was a time when people did.
There was a time,
right?
Things have dramatically changed in the last 5 to 10 years, but it wasn't just from like the last, presidential administration, which was really bad. It's been heading this direction for a while now.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I follow you on Twitter, and
I am so sorry.
And no. And you're vocal, right? I don't think you're confrontational, but you've got opinions and they're backed. You've got intelligent responses. I mean, how challenging and frustrating is that for you when you see something on Twitter that's obviously not true, that goes against science? It just must enrage you, right?
It does. And I'll tell you what makes me most upset about it is that I have spent the last 5 years working with scientists to try to teach them to become better at communicating to the public or with the public. And the first thing we teach them is that giving people better information doesn't mean that they're going to make better decisions. We call that the information deficit model. Scientists love to plug the holes, gaps in knowledge, right? Oh, well, you don't understand this because you don't have this piece of information. So let me give you that piece of information, and that's going to help you come to the better decision, right? So, for example, like vaccine safety. A lot of times physicians and scientists will say, well, they're safe, right? This is what they'll do. They'll give you all the information you need to tell you why you should get it, but it doesn't change your opinion because the people that you talk to who are not experts are probably forming your opinions more, right, than the experts are, because a lot of our opinions are formed by the company that we keep, let alone, or not the least of which is necessarily a professional who understands the science behind it. So what's frustrating to me is that I do this stuff even though I know it's not going to be effective. I say, you're wrong, right? Like somebody says something on Twitter and they're obviously wrong. I will tell them why they're wrong. That's not effective. I know that, but I'm not usually trying to change their opinion. I'm trying to set the record straight so that other people may see that as well. I don't expect that it will change anyone's opinion, but misinformation is just as bad as disinformation when it comes to understanding science. And so we try to nip it in the bud wherever we can. But it's frustrating, like you said, because I know it's not going to be effective. And so why do I do it? I keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. I don't know why I do it. I can't help myself. I think that's the scientist in me. When I see something wrong, I want to fix it.
Yeah.
Even though I know that this is not going to fix it.
So what do you think we need to do to get sane again?
We need to listen.
As a world.
We got to listen to more good music.
We got to listen to more good music. Right. Which is something that we're going to talk about in just a second here. Yeah. I want to share something really personal with you. It's something that I've never really shared with anyone before.
I'm honored.
It's something that, I think it's something that can really inspire others and to make a change in their life. And I think I figured out the secret to life. And it's what's that music? Jason, what's that music? Is that you?
Probably.
Oh, you did. It's my 20th show. Oh, and you're celebrating for me. You got me some cake? Is this cake from you?
I'm really not sure what you're talking about, but
oh
yeah.
My gosh, Jason.
Thank
you
cake.
so much. Oh, these balloons. Oh, it's a big celebration in the studio now because this is our 20th episode.
Congratulations.
That's so sweet of you. Yes, thank you for remembering and for celebrating with me.
My pleasure.
You had so much to do with this, right?
So much.
Yeah. Do you make it a habit of surprising people like this?
I do. I make it a habit of surprising people just as much as people make it a habit of surprising me that I'm surprising them.
Well, thank you so much for this. Okay. All right. Enough of this. Let's get back to what I was saying. something. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. All right. Well, we're going to take a short break, Jason. But when we come back, we are going to talk about one of your favorite podcasts. And it seems like it's a great podcast to talk about because we're talking about some deep, heavy stuff. And this is the type of music that leads into talking about deep, heavy stuff.
Let's do it.
Podfulness.
Today's episode of Podfulness is brought to you by Snow Sticks. Sure, it's summer right now, but you never know when that nor'easter is going to hit. Do you live in a snow state? Or maybe if you're like me, you live in a semi-snow state, a state that at one time in history received a lot of snow, but now, not so much. You never know if that big storm is just around the corner. So how about we go buy some snow sticks and put them into the ground now? It's never too early. I have a neighbor that keeps his snow sticks up all year long. That's curb appeal. Looking good, Mr. McCrae. Looking very good. It's crucial to mark where the driveway is for those times when you completely forget how far your house sits from the street. Sure, it's a straight shot from your garage to the road, no curves, no hills, no obstacles. It's just a straight line, but those snow sticks are needed in case you forget what a straight line looks like. Snow sticks are 4 feet tall. Will it ever snow that much? Probably not. If it does, you'll be thankful you have those snow sticks in, because once that snow melts, you'll be reminded how smart you thought you were to install dozens of unnecessary orange sticks in your yard. Snow sticks. I spent how much money on those things? And now, back to the show. The Deadpod is not a typical podcast because there's not a lot of talking.
Nope.
So from the episodes that I listen to, the host does an introduction at the beginning. He runs down the songs that you're going to hear from the Grateful Dead, and then the music plays.
It does.
And that's
the music
essentially
plays.
it.
Yep. It's beautiful. It is the most beautiful podcast I've ever listened to.
So talk to me about why it's so beautiful to you.
Okay. So John Henriksen is the host of the Deadpod.
Is he the professor?
He is. He's the
Yes,
professor.
gotcha.
I've been listening to the professor since I was an undergraduate at the University of Missouri. He was on the airwaves in Columbia, Missouri, and he was one of the only opportunities that I had as an undergraduate student to listen to live Grateful Dead music that wasn't already on a cassette tape in my house.
Okay.
Right. I mean, there was David Gans has the Grateful Dead Hour, or he used to. I don't think that still runs anymore. And that was a nationally syndicated Grateful Dead show that was on public radio. But KOPN, Columbia, Missouri, the mighty fine 89, they used to have their own local Grateful Dead Hour, and it was the professor who ran it. And it was awesome because first of all, he's just a regular guy who lived in town, no longer lives there, but just, regular guy who was a tape trader. So like he was getting these shows from other tape traders, and he would get really excited when a show that he had been searching for years suddenly became available, and he would play that. Right, it would be like the most enthusiastic, excited hosting of a Grateful Dead hour that I had ever heard, that anyone I think ever produced. And then I lost track of him when I left Columbia. And then when I was working on my dissertation, I was searching for things to listen to when I was working in museum collections. And this was in the early days of iPods. So I actually had a bright pink iPod mini that went everywhere with me because I got it as a hand-me-down from my sister-in-law who upgraded, right? I was a poor grad student. I had no money, but I had a bright pink iPod mini.
Yeah, you
and
did.
on it, I had several episodes of the Deadpod that I found by searching for Grateful Dead music, right? And so this would have been in the early 2000s. After he left Columbia, after I left Columbia, John was still posting things on the internet, right? So you could download like long MP3s of shows, right? So he would record it all there and he would play it, and you could just download it. So I would download it, put it on my iPod, and it got me through so much of the data collection for my dissertation, sitting in museum collections like the Natural History Museum in DC, for example. I did like a 9-month residency there, studying bones of all sorts of monkeys and raccoons and all sorts of mammals. and I would scan them in a CT scanner, a CAT scanner,
Uh-huh.
and look at the internal geometry of the bones, right? Try to make inferences about behavior from those bones and then apply those to fossils the whole time listening to the Deadpod. So it was like I had the professor with me when I was an undergrad. I had him with me as a grad student. And now, because he makes his podcast available through Apple Podcasts, I can still listen to him every week. And now, when he checks out, when he signs off, he says, thanks for picking this up again. This is the professor. Thanks for picking up the Deadpod, right? It used to be, this is the professor on the Mighty Fine 89 KOPN, Columbia, Missouri. And, whenever I hear the professor, I just get nostalgic for those shows that were obscure and that he would get excited about. So oftentimes when I'm listening to a particular track, I could be put back in a spot, right? So there's a classic 70s track called Lost Sailor that often segues into another track called Saint of Circumstance. So you'll oftentimes see that listed on a set list as Sailor into Saint. And there's a particular version of it from the sort of mid 80s that when I hear it, it immediately puts me back into the Field Museum in Chicago and collecting data on New World monkeys.
That's the cool thing about music. It's so great.
Right. And so I can hear that song any other time, right? And it doesn't put me there. But if I hear that particular version of it, it doesn't matter where I am. I'm immediately transported
It's
back.
different
to that,
enough.
right?
It's different enough from
Exactly.
the other versions. Yeah.
And it's because, the instrumentation changed, right, for the Grateful Dead from the 60s to the 70s through the 80s through the 90s, right? And so everybody has their favorite eras. My favorite era of the Grateful Dead is late 80s because that's when I came into the Dead sphere, right? That's when I first heard my first Dead show.
Yeah.
Somebody handed me a tape. Scott Rosenthal, actually, shocker, another Jewish kid, showed me a tape of the Grateful Dead. It was a late 80s show and I fell in love. Right.
Yeah, and the recordings of these shows, the Dead encouraged people to bring their own recording equipment, right? Put it in the middle, right in the middle there by the soundboard. I don't know how many other bands do that, but I remember going to a concert, not a Dead concert, but another artist, I can't remember who, and seeing this giant circle of recording equipment. So because they were so permissive, this show, which you find on Apple Podcasts, does the Grateful Dead or whoever publishes their music have a problem with this person, with the professor, airing these full-length shows?
Absolutely not, right? I mean, they are fully encouraging of passing that music along. That was their shtick, right? I mean, they were they didn't get a lot of radio play.
No, they didn't. So that's right, because their songs were so long.
Right, exactly. Right, exactly.
But I was so curious to know how they grew in popularity before technology, before you could share things socially, and other than what was their big song in the 80s that was on all the time? Touch of Grey, right?
Yeah,
Touch of Grey. And everyone knows Truckin', but
right.
How did they become so popular?
Truthfully, I think it has a lot to do with the counterculture scene of the late 60s. They were the house band for Ken Kesey's electric Kool-Aid acid tests. So, people would come and take acid and the Grateful Dead would play or they would not play. And that was the thing. They could do whatever they wanted and it would be a cacophony of sound or it might sound beautiful. But either way, that became the signature of that counterculture movement. And it just kept growing and growing and growing. And then the touring, the extensive touring, right? Passing around all of these tapes among traders of shows that were played in, for example, Deer Creek. Like here we are, we live in Indianapolis, right? I have been to Deer Creek more times as a non-Indianapolis resident than as an Indianapolis resident. And that's because I would come and see shows at this legendary amphitheater back when it was in the middle of a cornfield. It's not quite as exciting now.
No, true.
But it's still, the sound is still fantastic, right? But there were legendary shows played there by the Dead, by Fish, by all sorts of bands, right? And I knew about them because I had the tapes, right? Or I was at them, right? So, pretty crazy.
It's great. That's how things went viral back then on cassette tapes.
Exactly, for sure.
So the show that I listened to was from 1973, right? And they played Truckin'. Is Truckin' played on every episode? Do you hear that song more than any other song?
No. Truckin' is a song that is played a lot in the Dead catalog. It just is. It's played a lot. And it's because it's a great tune and it's a jammin' tune, right? I mean, it's one where they can really stretch it out. Funny thing though is that the joke is that Bobby Weir never got the words right. He always messed up the lyrics, and so one of the things that the Grateful Dead did do, that's a lot of D's right there.
Yeah, right.
Was they released their like a late 80s concert from New Year's on DVD, VHS first, right? But then on DVD. And they had like a Q&A with fans. And like even at that point in their history, people were still asking Bobby when he was going to learn the words to Truckin'. So so yeah, they don't play it at every show, but it's played a lot.
How much of a role did drugs play in the writing of their music? Do you know that?
All of it.
All
I would assume all of it.
and in the listening. So drug use was rampant, right?
And in the playing, right?
In
So
the play, okay. Could you tell nights when they were sober and when they weren't by the way they played?
they weren't sober, but you could tell nights when they were really messed up versus other nights, right? So so I don't remember which one of the members of the band tells the story, but there's a song called Crazy Fingers that starts with a bunch of arpeggios, just a constant sort of cycle of the same three notes over and over and over again.
Yep.
Jerry's playing it, and this was heavy in his heroin days, and he was just stuck in a cycle, like practically passed out, standing there playing the same three notes over and over again, not moving to the rest of the song. And somebody had to be like, "Hey, Jerry, you with us, buddy?" Right? It's like, "Oh, sorry." Right? So like, you can hear that. You can hear it.
What other professions can you show up that messed up? You know what I mean? And still have a job the next day.
Right. And still have people saying that was the best show I've ever seen.
It's
right?
Great, man.
That's right. Exactly. That's, like we should all be so lucky to find people that love us like that.
Yeah, no kidding. Who is a modern day equivalent to Grateful Dead? Is it Dave Matthews? Not in the sense of drug use, but I'm talking about the following and the multiple days, multiple shows in one location.
Fish. It has to be Fish.
Fish is still around.
Right?
Yeah. Right. Anyone else?
Yeah. I mean, maybe Dave Matthews, although I think you get a skewed view of Dave Matthews living here in Indianapolis. And so I'll tell you why. I was really surprised to learn how much Dave Matthews loves the city of Indianapolis and how much people in Indianapolis love Dave Matthews compared to anywhere else I've ever lived. You can drive around this town and you can see fire dancer stickers on cars all over the place. Like, "Oh, another Dave fan. Oh, another Dave fan. Oh, another Dave fan." And even having not lived here before, I would come to Deer Creek to see Dave Matthews because I know that that's like a place where he loves to play. In fact, he plays here every summer.
Yeah.
2 nights, and it's always a Friday, Saturday, right? He gets the pick of whatever he wants. And it's every single tour he stops here. It's insane the kind of following he has here in Indianapolis. So you don't have that he doesn't have that in other places the same way he does here.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So so your view of Dave Matthews being that same kind of touring act is skewed, I think, because if you've been to see Dave here at Deer Creek, like it's a different experience. I've seen Dave several other places and it's not quite the same. The crowd isn't quite the same, right? People here just love him.
Yeah. I grew up such a Mellencamp fan, and then I realized, Mellencamp doesn't mean the same to other parts of the country as he does to here.
It's funny you should say that because Mellencamp didn't mean anything to me until we moved here. And now, like when he comes on, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I've always liked his music, but like I feel more connected to his music. And I think there's something to be said about it. Tom Petty also, because he often referenced Indiana in his lyrics. Same kind of thing. People here love him.
Yeah. So the Deadpod it's a pretty niche podcast. I mean, if you love Grateful Dead music, if you love jam bands, it's definitely worth listening to. How is it? This will be my last question about the Deadpod. How is this different than listening to a bunch of live music, just streaming it on Spotify or Apple? Is it because you get the whole show from start to finish?
You don't get the whole show. You usually get a whole set though. But I think what makes it different is that you get the contextualization from the taper's perspective, right? So I don't remember what the date of the show was or even when it aired on the podcast, but I remember several times, right? The professor would say things like, "This has been a really exciting week in tape trading circles because a long sought after Dark Star from 1969 became, or from 1972 was released. And so now it's in circulation and it hadn't been in circulation before. So now we have our hands on it. We're going to play it for you." I know people who have been collecting, like Dark Star is a great song. It's, an iconic Grateful Dead song, and it's from the psychedelic era of the Grateful Dead. So, I know that everyone thinks that all Grateful Dead music is probably psychedelic. It's not. There was some stuff that was much more psychedelic than others, and there was some stuff that was much more melodic than others. This was one of those psychedelic songs with, just all sorts of sounds and meandering sort of tune that would keep coming back into play, but then would go off and wander somewhere else for a while and then come back to it. People have been collecting Dark Stars for a long time. And 1972 had a bunch of really well-known Dark Stars. I remember,
50 years
hearing
ago.
them. Right. I remember hearing, times when a new version that had not been heard before, except by the people at that show, became available. And that enthusiasm is what makes it much more exciting, right? The contextualization and the enthusiasm behind it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of enthusiasm, you also have a podcast that people are very enthusiastic about, right? And would you say it's in the same genre as the Deadpod?
I would say no. There's very little music and much more talking.
Well, here's your chance. Just give us a real quick synopsis of what you do on your podcast.
Sure. Our podcast is called Science Night. It has kind of morphed a little bit over the last couple of years as we've been trying to figure out the best way to format it. But right now, what we do, I have two co-hosts. One of my co-hosts, James Reed, is the director of the anatomy lab at Dartmouth. And my other co-host is Steffi Deem. She is an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. She is a fusion scientist. And we talk about the coolest, strangest science news of the week. And then try to put those stories into accessible language that the public can understand. So all three of us were trained by the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science at Stony Brook. So we all got training from Alan Alda's group. Alan, being the very famous actor, and
Sure.
Hawkeye Pierce, right? But before that, or after that rather, he had a show on PBS called Scientific American Frontiers, where he would talk to scientists about the work they do in their labs. And he realized that if he could train scientists to use the principles of improvisational theater, to talk about their work, he could make them better at communicating what they do, because they would get out of their professor heads and start attuning to their audience better. And so we all got training in that way. And so we invite folks onto the podcast to talk about the cool work that they're doing. But we're less interested in the work and more interested in why they got interested in the work. So tell us your story. The thing that we have noticed is that most people don't know a scientist, or they don't know that they know a scientist. And so if we make scientists more accessible as people, we can, there's data that support this. You can actually change people's opinions a little bit better because they become trustworthy as not just scientists, but also as people. And so that's kind of what we do.
That's cool. Well, we'll leave a link to your podcast in the show notes. Okay.
Thank you.
Jason, you've got a brain like no one else I know. You're a man of science.
Something like that.
You're a good conversationalist. You got a nice voice.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're also very creative. And I noticed that when I follow you on Twitter, you're very adept at puns and providing creative answers to questions. So you follow this Twitter account that asks fake Jeopardy questions, right?
Yes, I do.
And you have to provide an answer that's usually pretty absurd, but your answers are always great. So thanks, since you've got that skill, I wanted to create a game that honors your unique talents. And I have this feeling that it's going to be a bust, but I'm going to give it a try anyway.
Let's do it.
Right. So the game is called Man versus Machine.
Podfulness.
And this is how it's going to work. I'm going to fabricate a scenario, a very short scenario, and you will be tasked with coming up with an answer in pun form.
Okay.
For example, if I say, why did the tomato turn red? You might respond, because it saw the salad dressing. Yes. Now that's a pun that I found online. I did not make that one up. Right. But I'm going to create my own setup and you come up with the pun. Now, at the same time, you must know that I asked Chat GPT to do the same.
Yes.
So if your pun is better, you get a point.
Okay.
Okay. I will provide you with 6 different setups and I judge whether you or Chat GPT came up with the better pun.
Fantastic.
Right. Now, if you get 3 points, you win. And what you win, there's actually a prize involved this time.
Okay.
For the last 19 episodes, no prize. If you win, I'm going to buy you a drink the next time I see you out.
Fantastic.
That's the prize.
If I lose, I have to buy you a drink?
Yes, that's the way it works.
All right, that works
That's
for me.
right. Okay. So
It's a
here we
win-win.
go. What kind of a bird is good at basketball?
I mean, it's not a Jayhawk.
Oh, you went with the early slam.
Oh yeah, for sure. What kind of bird is good at basketball? An African hoopoe.
Excellent job. An African hoopoe. Okay. See, I thought maybe one of you would say Larry, right? But
That's fair.
ChatGPT said a swish bird because it
Ooh.
always makes its shots.
Okay.
You said an African hoopoe?
Yes.
I think that that's a better answer. You're getting a point for that.
Nice.
Well done. Okay.
I just want to give a quick shout out to the Viewmaster from Discovery Kids that my kids watched when they were really little, because that's the only reason I knew what an African hoopoe was.
And it stuck with you.
It did.
Perfect. Why does the teacher always give so much homework? I'll give you a moment to think about that. By the way, these are just random setups. I didn't create these thinking there was a pun there. I just came up with questions. So why does the teacher always give so much homework?
Because they teach in the schoolhouse.
The schoolhouse, because that's a home, right? Okay.
Yeah.
ChatGPT, you seem disappointed, but just wait.
I am.
ChatGPT said, because they want to ensure that the students are class working hard and learning the material.
Yeah,
That's
I
just-
win.
Oh, yeah,
That's
you win
terrible.
without question, right? You can't get any worse than that. All right, so ChatGPT is down. Here we go. What kind of food should you never eat for breakfast?
Dinner.
Dinner. That's, you know what? ChatGPT said lunch because it's not breakfast food.
Right.
Jason, you and ChatGPT were on the same page. That cancels out, so nobody gets points.
Nice. That works.
Okay.
That works.
Here we go. 3 more. Finish this sentence.
It's interesting though, actually, because
Yeah.
you can eat breakfast for dinner. We do that a lot.
Oh, that's my favorite.
But you can't eat dinner for breakfast. That's gross.
That is gross. Right.
Yeah.
Like lasagna
Right.
for
Who
breakfast
wants
doesn't
that?
work. No.
Right.
All right. Finish this sentence. Last night, I dreamt I was floating in outer space, dressed in a gorilla costume. Just finish that line.
And I was sitting behind the wheel of a Tesla.
There is the Tesla floating around in outer space, isn't there?
There is.
Okay, so ChatGPT said, last night I dreamt I was floating in outer space dressed in a gorilla costume, and suddenly I realized that I was an ape-stronaut.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's
Way
a good
better.
one. So,
Yeah.
ChatGPT gets a point for that
Sure.
one. All right, setup number 5. Why was the dentist afraid of the dark? This is hard. You're having to think on your feet quickly.
Yeah, I don't care. I don't mind. Why was the dentist afraid of the dark?
It doesn't matter what you say, you're going to win because the ChatGPT one was terrible. Yeah.
Afraid of the dark because cavities are dark.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
I don't know.
see.
That's
Right,
what
cavity. There's a cavity joke in there somewhere.
There's somewhere.
right?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
You could flesh that out later. Yeah.
I
So
could.
ChatGPT said because they were scared they might run into a root canal in the darkness.
Yeah,
Like a canal?
I
That's
don't
kind
know.
of like a cavity. You know
Yeah.
what? We're going to just push that one aside. That was terrible
Yeah.
For both you and ChatGPT. All right. So final one. Why did Superman wear a cape?
Why does Superman wear a cape? So he could Kal-El himself a superhero.
Oh my gosh. That is brilliant. That is brilliant. Kal-El
bad.
himself. Oh my gosh. That wins. ChatGPT had a good one, but not as good as yours, Jason. Yours was
yeah?
a super thinker. Yeah. Superman wore a
Nice.
cape to help him steal the show.
Oh, okay. That's a good one.
Yeah, Man
It
of
is a
Steel.
good
No,
one.
you got 3 points, Jason. I don't care what anyone
Nice.
says. ChatGPT still needs some work. It's not quite at the level of human intellect.
Yeah, well, neither am I. So
This
we
was
both
a lot of
a work
fun.
in progress. That was fun. I want more. Let's keep it going.
This has been Dr. Jason Organ. My name is Mark Bernstein. Thank you for listening to Podfulness. And Jason, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on the show. Mark, it was great to see you.
So I hit the stop button and Jason and I continued to talk a little bit. And he asked me what inspired me to start a podcast. And the truth of the matter is that I've always had side hustles. I've always had creative outlets. But in this post-pandemic world, I was feeling really disconnected to the world around me. And I don't consider scrolling through my social media feeds, I don't consider that connection. I don't consider that being social, quote unquote. So I wanted to start a podcast where I could talk with people, friends, but also strangers about their favorite podcast. And then we also have a little fun. So that's really what's behind it, being able to feel more connected. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, I got a favorite podcast that I listen to, maybe I should share it with the world. Reach out to me. Send me a direct message on Twitter or Instagram, or send me an email, podfulness@gmail.com, and come on the show and we'll talk about it. And even if you don't want to come on the show, could you do me a solid? Could you please tell people about Podfulness? Maybe ask them to follow Podfulness on Twitter or Instagram. Maybe tell them that there's a podcast out there that provides suggestions to new podcasts, but also it's a fun listen. It's enjoyable. It's an easy listen. That would mean so much to me. So thank you very much, as always, for listening to this 20th episode of Podfulness, and hopefully many, many more. I will see you next time on a brand new episode of
Podfulness.